What do you do if you love trains and you're modeling the 1970s and one of your friends brings over modern passenger equipment that wouldn't have been run on your railroad until 20 years later? Well, you could show them the door, or you could make the best of it. And that's what we did this day when my friend Dave Enger brought over his Sounder Commuter passenger cars and Amtrak Cascades locomotive. The sound the locomotive made was so awesome that we decided to make a complete cycle of running the commuter train in a pull mode from Everett to Seattle, and then in a pusher mode from Seattle back to Everett, just like the prototype does today. Hi, this is Burr Stewart, and you're watching part 20 of my continuing series on model railroad operations, featuring my Burlington Northern model railroad layout, which is theoretically set in 1973, but for today it looks like it's going to be set more like 2003. So let's get to work. In order to run this train, we first needed to remove some F units that were parked in front of the Everett station at Bayside Yard, which you can see here in yellow, both the locomotive stripes and the station. You might recognize these locomotives from some of my recent videos on my YouTube channel. We needed to move these back past the crossover there in the distance so that the Sounder commuter train could come in and load passengers at the station. I never saw an F unit I didn't enjoy watching, so hopefully you feel that way too. In some ways, a passenger operation is a little less complicated than freight switching like we usually do in these videos. So I thought I would take advantage of this opportunity to just show you the sequence of stations along the main line on this railroad. And so as we proceed with our commuter train, I'll break away and show you the schematic diagrams of where each station is as we move along through our journey. Now we've cleared the fouling point, so we can flip the two switches for the crossover and bring in the commuter train. It looks like there's a swing dance in progress next to the station, but I'm not hearing any big band music. I suppose the locomotive noise would drown that out anyway. So where exactly are we on the layout? Let's take a look at the schematic of the different towns that are modeled here and see where this train is starting out. See the black dot there at Everett Bayside Yard with the code BAY for Bayside. That's where the train starts, and it runs all the way south to Seattle. So as we continue our run, we'll move to the right and show you these charts at other stations. But now it's time for our train to leave Everett and head south towards our next stop, which will be Mukilteo. I'm not actually sure on the prototype. It stops at Mukilteo. I think maybe it stops at Edmonds. But remember, this is a model railroad set in 1973, and we're just pretending that we can run the Sounder train using these modern cars. So we're going to make stops at stops along the way on my layout, which aren't necessarily the same as the prototype uses today. Now we're running along the Puget Sound shoreline. And pulling into the Mukilteo station. Here it is from a different camera angle, pulling into Mukilteo. That green 57 Chevy is there to remind me of my uncle who used to drive one of those cars. He was very influential in my early love of model railroading. Well, while we're waiting for the passengers to board, let's take a look at the map here. This is the black dot showing Mukilteo, where we're now located, You can see we're to the right of Bayside, and our next stop will be the Ballard Station, which is in between Mukilteo and Bulmer Yard, which is another name for the Inner Bay Yard. All aboard! The upcoming Ballard Station is on the right-hand side of the main line, so we're going to take the crossover here to put our train next to the platforms in Ballard. If you're not from this area, you may wonder why they're called sounder cars. The entire metropolitan area around Seattle is on a body of water called Puget Sound. So when they started doing commuter rail services, they called it the sounder trains. The Ballard Station was probably torn down by 1973, as they had abandoned the earlier commuter runs. I have just a plastic stand-in structure for it at the moment. It'll do for now. Looking quickly at the map, we're located just to the left of the black dot indicating Bulmer Yard, which is just south of Ballard. All aboard! This truss bridge is my faint attempt to represent the glory of bridge number 4 over the Salmon Bay in North Seattle. Now we're rounding the corner and proceeding underneath the Emerson Street Bridge and into the Inner Bay Yard, otherwise known as Bulmer Yard, named after the CEO of the Great Northern before the merger. You might recognize this area from some of my recent videos. From some of the junk lying around, you might get the impression it's still under construction. Does watching a train go through an S-curve ever get old? Pay no attention to that masked man. While Dave and I were running this train, Magnus was working on the paving in the Pier 9091 area. He was using EVA foam, which you can see draped on the left side of the view here. Now we get to show off Dave's horn blowing skills for the 3 or 4 grade crossings that are located in this area of downtown Seattle. The prototype railroad dives into a tunnel underneath downtown Seattle and emerges at the King Street station. Of course, that's Mount Rainier in the background looking over this whole scene. I have absolutely no room to model the King Street station, so I put a little poster of it on the wall there, and we stopped the train to symbolically indicate that we've arrived in Seattle. As we look at the schematic diagram of this area, our black dot now shows that we've arrived in Stcy Street Yard, which is just to the south of the King Street station. Our train now empty, we can proceed to the coach yard just south of Stcy Street, where we'll park the cars and service them and get prepared for the run in the reverse direction in the pusher mode. This road crossing is Royal Brome, which was a key access point for the Kingdome Stadium which of course has now been torn down, but was a big deal in 1973. Wait, who said anything about 1973? This is the Sounder commuter train. Forget I said anything. Now we're entering what I'm calling the coach yard, which is actually part of the Argo yard. I had to condense this all in the layout because we have interchange with both the Milwaukee, the Union Pacific, and the coach yard functions, all in this area, as you can see on the schematic diagram. So we usually use two of the tracks in Argo for passenger equipment, and today we're using the track right next to the main line. Now, before we start the run back to Everett from Seattle, let's just take a look at the maps of the track layout as we go. This is the Argo yard. You can see I call it the BN coach yard and the UP and Milwaukee interchange. I made these track diagrams using PowerPoint in copying this archaic design from the prototype spins books that were made for the actual train crews to use. I'll cut away to the others as we go through the different towns on our way back to Everett, just so you can get oriented. It looks like we're ready to start our pusher phase of the operation, where we have the engine at the back of the train, and the engineer is riding up in the front on the left side of the coach and driving the train, blowing the horn and so forth, with an electrical connection back to the locomotive in the rear. In a perfect world, we'd have a headlight with some flashing strobes on the front of our train on that coach, but these are not powered coaches, so we'll have to just imagine that. And like I've said before, this is reality model railroad video, not a perfect world. Cool looking train though. All the HO scale onlookers and workers are looking at this in 1973 saying, "Am I seeing something out of the future?" And they're right. Of course, our first stop, the origination of the train really, is the King Street Station in Seattle, represented simply by the painting on the backdrop. We'll stop here for a couple of minutes to load our passengers, and then we'll be on our way. Here's the track plan for the Stcy Street Yard complex, and the location of the King Street Station is right there at milepost 0.0, just to the right of the tunnel underneath downtown Seattle. Sounds like our train is ready to leave. You wouldn't necessarily know this, but we're crossing above the water heater for the house in this S-shaped tunnel, and I don't look forward to taking out this segment if we ever need to repair it. Emerging at the north portal of the tunnel, Mount Rainier watches over us as we blow all the grade crossings in this congested area of downtown Seattle. I can attest that this prototype move is every bit as annoying as the model move. One of these days I'll install grade crossing bell rings on those streets, and then it'll be even worse. As we move into the Interbay Yard now, on the left you can see the progress that Magnus has made on the paving for the Terminal 91 area, just in the time it's taken us to run this train. Here's the layout diagram for the Inner Bay Yard, also called Balmer Yard. And you can see the main line goes from 2 tracks down to 1 through the yard. And the Ballard station is off to the left there, just above the compass rose. This train would normally come through the yard on the main line, which is 1 track over. But today we were doing some construction to the right-hand side of the yard, so we put the train on the A track and had it cross over to what is now becoming the main one, so that it could be reverse running in order to be on the correct side of the double track for the Ballard station, coming up around the corner there to the left. If you didn't follow that, don't worry, I was just babbling, it doesn't really matter. If you did follow it, you're probably as much of an avid model railroader as I am. So here we are back at the Ballard station. Having picked up our passengers, we're ready to continue. Isn't it crazy how trains keep hitting that tree next to the track? I need to fix that. Once again, when we get down to that crossover, we'll cross over to the right-hand running main so that we can pull into the hypothetical Mukilteo station. The actual Everett station was at a place called Everett Junction, and I was forced to model Everett Junction and Mukilteo in the same place, even though on the prototype they're miles apart. Here it is on a map. You can see that the Everett Junction there goes from Main 2 up to what's called the High Line, which went directly to the Delta Yard, whereas Main 1 continues on the Low Line to the Bayside Yard. So unlike the prototype, I located the Everett station in Bayside and the fictitious Mukilteo station where Everett Junction also is. Well, the passengers have had plenty of time to get off the train at Mukilteo, so let's get on to the next and final stop of this run. Have you enjoyed this pusher operation, by the way? I know I have. No switching of cars. It's kind of relaxing. Just stop at every station and wait for the passengers to get on and off and then get on your way. I normally enjoy a good complex switching maneuver, but this is kind of a nice break. Happy New Year! Well, as we come around the corner, we discover that our swing dancers are still dancing. They just couldn't get enough of that jazz band. But now they'll be joined by some other people getting off this train. What can you do? Well, the passenger carrying part of this run is over, but it seems to me that we need to put the passenger train away in the Everett Yard and bring our F units back to where they started. Plus, this gives us a chance to see a couple more S-curve moves. I never saw an S-curve, or for that matter an F unit, that I didn't like. We can park those passenger cars on the track next to the main line there, and then bring out the F units. I've had something of an obsession with these F units for the last few weeks because they're all numbered correctly for the BN prototype after the merger, which occurred in 1970. One of these days we'll do a full-length video of them hauling a train around the layout. But in the meantime, I keep inserting them into other videos just for the fun of it. For today's video, it has the extra benefit of helping us to remember this layout is set in 1973, and what you just watched for the last 20 minutes was an aberration, however pleasant it may have been. So as we put these locomotives away, this comes to the end of episode 20 of my ongoing model railroad operations video series. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back for many more in the future. In the meantime, this is Burr Stewart wishing you much fun with trains. And swing dancing too, for that matter. I recommend you take it up. Anything to keep you from spending all your time on model railroading.